Randomly with Ronnie Jr.
All right, we are here with Zack, Peter. I almost want to say Peters. Do people say that sometimes?
Yeah, they say it all the time, but there is no S at the end of my name.
Do you get pissed if somebody says that though?
Not really, unless you're like, no, I don't get pissed. I mean, yeah, no, I'm not that. I think people think I'm a lot more pretentious than I actually am. But I'm easy.
No. He's just got good commentary.
Inside and out of the bedroom, I'm easy.
Listen, this is how it goes. Let's get into it all. So this is Zack Peter of No Filter, the podcast. Basically, what era would you say you started the podcast game? Because it's been for years, at least 10 to 12 years, the originals. And then it was like this moment where it felt like it was people that just did it in the garage. I come from radio, so I was very hip to it early. And then it boomed where everyone's doing it. I felt like you hit it kind of at a good time. Let me know your introduction to the podcast space, why you named it No Filter.
I started the podcast 6.5, almost 7 years ago now. So it was like at the beginning when you had like Tim Ferriss and he had a podcast, and you had those people that like broke out in the podcast world, but not everybody had one yet. Not everybody knew what a podcast was. When I was in my first studio, I remember coming like into an Uber and going home and being like, oh yeah, I just take my podcast, talking to the Uber drivers. And they're like, well, what's a podcast? And I would have to explain to them. I'm like, well, it's like Netflix, but for like radio, like it's on demand audio. And at that time, nobody really understood what podcasting was. It wasn't like until maybe 2 or 3 years later that everyone started to become really savvy to the world of podcasting. And now everybody and their grandmother has a podcast. So yeah, I started pretty early on.
So do you feel like that's a good thing or a bad thing? Like the saturation in the marketplace? I have mixed feelings with it. Mostly, I believe it's a good thing because it does say that there's dollars to be had. And just because Ronnie Jr. doesn't have them today doesn't mean that I won't have them soon. And all of you will have to just, read about it. But what do you think about it being so busy? Does it seem okay and everyone could get a piece of the pie?
I think everyone can get a piece of the pie. Absolutely. I think when people say that the market is oversaturated, it is a cop-out. I think people, my mother always taught me that obstacles are only put in your path to prove how badly you want something. So if you aren't really that passionate, or if you don't really want to put in the work that it takes, like I'm a full-time podcaster. This is my full-time job now. This is my full-time career. I tape several times a week. And that's the basis of my income. And it's branched out from just the podcast, now becoming a YouTube channel and a wine line. And so that takes time, that takes grit, that takes hustle. I do think that there are people that can be those outliers that can make a successful podcast in a short amount of time. For me, I want to see the sustainability. I want to see if there's longevity with that, because I think if you come in and you rise too fast, you don't know how to kind of run through those ebbs and flows, because those ebbs and flows do come. And I still hit them to this day, where, I can be really good for so many months and then just have like a really shitty month. So I think starting early is good. I think there are a lot of people in the market today, but it forces you to be more creative. It forces you to find a niche that works within your world and try to, see what other people are doing and try to find ways to find the white space. Believe it or not, there is still white space in the market. You can still find out where you can fit your unique talents and build from there.
Yeah, I'm doing something that no one's doing, but also no one's watching. So what the heck? No, I'm kidding.
It takes time. Listen, for like 2 years, 30 people listened to my podcast.
Yeah,
30 people. And I was like, okay, when are we going to get past the 100 mark, Well, and then eventually time.
I wanted to talk to you about your confidence, because I feel like I'm in that same boat. Like, so I started radio in the dinosaur ages, 2002. I was on TV by 2004. People in my era, not only just because we're older now, we're 41 and we are so fabulous, but it's just like, it was a hard transition to move, as I'm being honest, it was a hard transition to move as fast as the new crop of digital creators, So I feel like one of the things when I try to find my voice, it's like, okay, well, what do I bring to the table? What's different about me? Which is actually a fun thing as far as finding that space. Yeah. What was your niche? Like, how did you find your space? Did you mess up a couple times, or was just being, what'd you say? You were easy? Was that what you thought of right away?
I've messed up several times. I mean, I feel like my life is just a constant, progression of, just fucking it up and making it up as I go, to be honest with you. And I feel like the podcast really, I started it very broadly, talking about pop culture and not so much reality TV, but mostly just general pop culture stuff, which everybody does. And then it wasn't until I really refined it into the world of reality TV, and then even broke it down onto a more micro level of Bravo reality TV. And that's when I started to see like it builds a community and an audience. And even I would say probably the past 2 years, breaking down like housewives scandals, primarily legal scandals like this Girardi stuff that I've broken down heavily on my podcast. I feel like that has really been what has helped the show rise. It's helped it find an audience because that was the niche. Everybody can talk about pop culture news, but if you really break it down to something that's very specific so that people know what they're getting when they're coming to you, that helps you build an authority within that space, and then it helps you build a community around that.
From what I know about you, you are a former fatty. As somebody
Yes.
who's always in that space of losing a ton of weight, gaining a ton of weight, and finding it so hard to keep a mindset that like it doesn't really dictate how you do your work. It definitely helps if you feel better about yourself, but it's a really harsh digital space to be not at your best. I want to know about your lifestyle growing up and struggling with your weight, and when you decided or how you decided to change it up, and why.
Yeah, food was my comfort. My parents had me at such a young age. They had me in high school that I don't think either of them was really ready to be a parent necessarily. And so they didn't know how to be a parent. So I kind of was like in this weird place of like, okay, let me try to figure this out on my own. And so obviously there were a lot of emotional needs that weren't being met. And so I found comfort in food. And to me, eating Hot Pockets and cup of noodles and ramen and anything I can find in the freezer and just like gorging on that made me feel good. It filled whatever void was inside of me that I was hoping to fill. And when I started to get older, when I started to get into like middle school, that's when I had become very heavy and I just wasn't confident. And I had boobs faster than the girls in our class were getting boobs. And I was like, this is not okay. Like, what can we do to fix this? And then I ended up developing a really unhealthy relationship with food and with my body. I had a friend that told me about being bulimic, and I followed in that path, and I struggled with bulimia for many, many years, heavily throughout high school. I was, very much big on diet pills and the cycle of binging and purging. And in college, I ended up restricting a lot more and struggled with anorexia and lost a lot of weight. And what it was is in high school, when I first started to lose the weight with all of these unhealthy behaviors that I had developed, I liked the attention that I was getting, and I liked that people were complimenting me for losing weight. Anytime anybody loses weight, people are like, oh, you look so good. And I was like, yeah, I am a bad bitch. I look hot. And so I was like, let me keep this going. It became an addiction, and I wanted to keep losing weight, and I wanted to feel in control of something. So what I was able to control was my weight. And so I kept trying to lose more and more weight to feel like I had some grasp on my life, and I loved the attention that I was getting. And then eventually it backfired, and then there was no longer the good attention, but it was like, oh my God, you're so skinny, you're losing so much weight. And I was becoming underweight. And it reached a point where I had gotten really scared when I was in college, and I had just kind of looked at my reflection one day, and I was like, I'm dying. Like I'm actually seeing the life being sucked out of my body, and the life just being sucked out of me, and I'm no longer the person that I know that I am, and I've become a caricature of the person that I used to be, because now I'm performing for people and letting them believe that I'm still the same person, when in reality I'm putting on a show, because on the inside I'm physically and emotionally just drained and dying. And I was like, I can't.
You're putting on a show because you don't want anyone to actually question you, see
Right.
you, any of that stuff.
Right. I was, on the inside, I was so just tired and fatigued and drained, but I was performing, and I've always been a performer, so I always knew how to turn it on. And that was becoming exhausting. And once I kind of had that moment with myself, like, okay, you need to do something. So I had secretly checked myself into a treatment center, and I spent about 4 weeks there, addressing the issue of bulimia. I had been clinically diagnosed. I went in for a consultation. They clinically diagnosed me, ended up going in full time and hiding it from everybody in my life. I didn't want anybody to know that I had an issue. I was like, I'll go in, I'll do whatever therapy, I'll do whatever they tell me to do. I'll walk out with my certificate, like I graduated high school, and it'll be good and nobody will ever have to know, and I'll be healed, I'll be cured forever. And that didn't work. And I had to continue to struggle and keep up with therapy and do a lot of education on nutrition and food, and really just find a way to like myself. You know, it started with, you know, because I was really overweight and then I was really underweight, and there was never that like internal happiness or that internal like fulfillment within myself. And that's what I really had to search for. So that's what like therapy helped with, you know, in terms of navigating food. I did a lot of education about nutrition and made a lot of lifestyle changes to the point where, you know, I was able to kind of find a healthy balance in my life.
Has that helped you with your podcast today? Because people cut deep on 100 different things. They could talk about your hair. Yes. They could talk about your, you know, being too big, the most, but they can't talk about your weight. Because you've already been through this journey, are you pretty good with it, or does the weight conversation still hit deep if it's tacky and if it's ugly and if it's meant to hurt?
I don't think I get my weight picked on very much anymore. I think one, because I'm so open about my struggles with my body and with my weight. And I just, you know, as anybody that struggles with like a serious eating disorder knows that you're always going to have those body image issues. As much as you want to love yourself every single day, as much as you think you have food under control, every day you're going to be facing some sort of insecurities, right? Because that's kind of the world that we live in. And even with myself, I have to watch myself on camera several times a week. That becomes so challenging, and I'm so hypercritical of myself. But when it comes to criticism on the internet, I mean, trust me, if you read it, like I take a lot of criticism.
Yeah,
I take a lot of heat.
I one day went in to write something really nice. You had spoke real candidly about a family issue, a loss. And I just wrote something nice. And I feel like because I'm a podcaster, maybe, or been in radio for so long, that's maybe where I come from. I could be funny and snarky like we all can. But when I saw the comments, they're not all as sweet as mine, you know?
No, I definitely, and here's the thing. I know, listen, I have a show called #NoFilter. I open myself up to criticism, and I've never been shy about that. And I started it from a very young age. I started doing stuff on the internet back when I was like in high school. So I have gotten used to taking criticism and learning how to, I mean, the reality is nobody's ever gonna be as harsh to you as you can be to yourself. And the only time you allow criticism to get to you is when there's a true insecurity there. So very rarely does the internet hurt my feelings anymore, because I've dealt with a lot of the shit that they try to throw my way. Yeah. But, you know, luckily I don't have too much that is ripped apart about my body or my appearance anymore. And I also feel like I'm very candid about that. So there's nothing that they can throw at me that would be a cheap shot that, you know, would hurt me after everything.
I think of my generation being born in the 80s, and the amount of people we could look at on the television may not always have been who we were or looked like us or talked like us. Now, your generation is a little bit younger. I wanted to know, who were the people that you were looking up to? Were they the people from yesteryear, like a Joan Rivers, or are you fascinated that, because, you know, for me, I'm always like, the digital space is so sloppy. But then there's some good out of that. Like I'm not going to lie to you that I'm a grumpy, bitchy 41-year-old, because I come from a different era, and I'm very proud that I've sort of finally navigated to this. Maybe it was one of the reasons I want to interview you, because I'm like, now looking at you not kids, but you younger ones who are almost 30 and loving the work you guys are doing. So I'm like, I'm finding something. So with your influences, were they strictly the traditional media, or were they a lot of the new media stuff and TikTokers or Twitch people? Like who really did it for you?
I still don't know what Twitch is to this day. So it's definitely not Twitchers. TikTok, I mean, here's the thing. I think I like to find a fine balance, because there are people that are very popular within the digital age that have found a way to master the game. And I think that there's something to be learned from them, because they're obviously in this new, you know, digital world. But I also think the traditional talent has a lot to bring to the table, especially when it comes to like work ethic. Like Joan Rivers, speaking of her, had a really strong, like, you know, big work ethic and was always tried to be very sweet to people and never said no to a job opportunity. And I feel like I was very blessed to be raised around a lot of really strong, independent women. My grandmothers both carried the weight of what my parents weren't able to really provide for me. My mother was a single mom for a really long time. My aunts also, carried their households or, were single mothers themselves. That I saw a lot of that. So I think when it came to other mentors out in the world, I gravitated to those types of women. So, when it comes to like traditional talent, I worked with Jenny McCarthy for a solid decade, right? Like back at the end of my time in high school when I was helping with her foundation. And she was a big influence on me, and just seeing her work ethic, being in entertainment. So I think I looked up to her a lot as well. So it's always that fine balance of like looking at, the older generation that has, I think the struggle that you find is with that older generation, not a lot of them are willing to tap into the digital world or this younger generation. And I think you have to have a combination of the two.
That's true.
You have to look at the past and see what they did because they were successful. And then you also have to look at the people now and see what they're doing and find ways to tap into that as well.
I think when you are finding your voice and you are shifting into different things of your career, you kind of got to go with what Whoopi said in Sister Act. If you wake up every day and you want to sing, you sing. If you wake up every day and you want to broadcast, you broadcast. Seems like you're having a blast with it. The question I have for you is, there are not a lot of people who are in quote unquote Hollywood and making it in this industry that are from Southern California. Talk to me about the duality. I'm one of the few. Obviously, I've lived in New York for about 7 years. I've lived in Vegas and Arizona as well. But a majority of my life was in Southern California. I'm not saying I like Southern California, but I want to talk about what it is to be an authentic Californian trying to make it in this industry, balancing family and the demands of this rigorous industry.
It's interesting because I feel like a lot of people that come here, or a lot of people that are here, mainly the ones that give us a bad rep in LA, are bitches from some other Midwest state, and they're here because, and the reason that they come here and become bitter is because back in Ohio, they were, the bee's knees. They were, they were the head of the football team or the lead cheerleader. And so they were the thing in their hometown. And
just because you were an Ohio 10, bitch, you are a 6 in LA.
Yeah, exactly. Because you come here and the competition is so, it's crazy, the competition here. And people don't realize that, and they're not used to that. So I think there's like this bitterness or this hardness that they build because there's an expectation that they're going to come here and be Angelina Jolie in 6 months, and that's just not the reality. Some of us are in it for like a decade plus before we really start to see any true success. And again, that's why I say I'm skeptical of people that really peak or become super trendy on social media, because they don't know how to sustain that, and they don't know how to build a long-term brand or a career for themselves. And so with growing up here in Los Angeles, I guess I was able to see people come and go. I was able to see the city eat them up, spit them out, and send them back to packing to Ohio. But for me, I think I had the luxury of at least having my family here. So if anything really went bad, I can easily go home. I'm very independent. So I'm like, once I'm on my own, I'm never going home. It's just something I wanted to prove to myself. But, I'm very grateful for the fact that I at least have my family nearby. On the holidays, I don't have to travel out anywhere. I don't have to. My life is very much built around my work and my family. Those are the two priorities in my life. So when I'm not working, I'm with my family. And when I'm not with my family, I'm working. And that's kind of just the life that I've built.
And did they have, as the family, did they have a concept of what you were trying to do? Like, sometimes the big families don't necessarily know. In my era, it was radio, so at least was tangible. How did you tell them, I'm going to be a podcaster and that's going to pay my bills? How'd you tell them that?
Well, before it was a podcaster, back in high school, I'd started doing fundraising, which is how I ended up connecting with Jenny and running her foundation. But I started in doing nonprofit fundraising. There's no money in nonprofit fundraising. There's no money in podcasting. There's no money. I was also trying to when I wanted to grow up, let me start at the beginning. When I wanted to grow up, I wanted to be an actor, because I knew I was an entertainer. I knew I wanted to be on television. And that was the only way I knew how to do that, was to be an actor. And then eventually in high school, I fell into fundraising, which was inspired by my brother that was diagnosed with autism. And I just always was very clear with what I wanted and the direction that I was going to go in. And I think when you have conviction, nobody really questions you. So because I was always so fiercely independent as a kid, once I was in high school and I was like, okay, I'm organizing these fundraisers and I'm going to raise money and I need you guys to all show up at this place at this time because I need you to volunteer because we're raising money to help kids with autism. And so my family was just like, okay, like nobody ever questioned me. And I think it was because I just had that brazen, personality to just, assert myself and assert what it was that I wanted. So I remember in high school, which is when I wrote my first book, I remember even when I told them, it was like so matter of fact of like, okay, so I'm writing a book. I even texted my dad. I was like, hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. I'm writing a book, whatever. And so I kind of always made these decisions and just like went with them all the way. And so I think my family always knew that I was going to be okay. So there never really was a questioning of it. I think there were moments where my mom wanted to question it, but I was kind of just like, all right, you missed out on enough years of me growing up. You don't really get to have a say. You either support me in the seat next in the passenger seat, or you can get out the car. But like, this is where I'm going. Take it, get in or get out. And eventually she decided to get in and she likes the perks of my life now. But I think, because I had that conviction, my family just followed suit. I think they doubted me, when they didn't understand what I was doing, but they always knew that no matter what, I would find a way to land on my feet.
Momentum is everything on the good and the bad. Yeah. When you are fucking up, in my opinion, it's always because I don't want to say like you have your head in your ass, but you really are going the wrong way. And I always find it magical how when your mindset is right, you can almost open up every daggone door you want. That's how I feel. Momentum is everything. Can I tell you something that is just so intriguing? And again, a lot of times in the past, I've been the old hater, but I'm going to try my best to be open just to give perspectives even to you guys, because you're really close to the age of my little sister. So it's not like I don't know your type. In fact, I remember telling my little sister once when she was in high school, she's literally right around your age. I said, she tells me, she goes, Ronnie, we could have our cell phones at lunch. I says, you could have your cell phones on during lunch. Check this out, Zach, old ass stories right here. This is like Melrose Place era. We could not even walk with our backpacks. And if they looked at you and you looked suspect to whatever that kind of bullshit was, they could go through your backpack and look for a pager and then get you in trouble. So look what happens in just 10 years difference. My little sister, she, the access that you guys had. And what I mean by access, I mean, I grew up in an era that as soon as you graduated high school, you had to do what you had to do to create your radio dream, which is exactly what I did. I went into interning, background talent. I, was an extra on every damn show you could possibly be. And then once I got into radio at Clear Channel, I just, went for broke. But it's so intriguing, maybe a little bit of a hater on my end, to hear that you could do so much in high school. Like that literally did not exist. You were able to do, dream and aspirations at such a young age on the digital front. It's insane to me. It's so crazy. All right. Well, that wraps it up because you talk all day long. Thank you for your time. That is it for me. You did speak about Patreon, so I definitely got to let the world know Ronnie Jr. does have a Patreon. It is brand new. Patreon.com/randomlyRJ Jr. So just donate, like help me out. I'm having fun podcasting. Love hearing your story and keep up the good work, man.
Thank you, Ron.
Ooh.
Yay.